Right, I'm here today with Mike Cashman. I'm Peter Cook of Let's Reboot Britain. Now, Mike Cashman is a very interesting character. He lives in Milton Keynes, and we're going to be talking about his constituency this afternoon, and his MP, Iain Stewart, who is an interesting character. But Mike himself is an author, a business person, someone who understands complexity and systems and has worked extensively in that. And we're going to be talking about one of the most complex things on earth, or two of the most complex things, Brexit and COVID. Good afternoon, Mike.
Good afternoon, Peter.
Now, I do know that you are a persistent, but not a troublesome letter writer, and you've written many, many letters to Iain. And to give him a lot of credit, your MP has actually written back on many occasions, and on one or two occasions, he has written back really empathetically, which we shall come to later in the interview. But on other occasions, I believe he's given stock answers. And one of the things you challenged him on, which is very important as we move towards the end game of Brexit, is this question of Northern Ireland. Do you want to expound a little upon that?
Yeah, certainly. Back in December, I pointed out that there were 14 months to implement this supposed Northern Ireland protocol, and it was a disaster waiting to happen because an unclear requirement, two bodies renegotiating their relationship, have a background in systems. I knew perfectly well that there was no time, the 14 months was nowhere near long enough to implement what they were talking about, particularly since they didn't then and still don't know what they were doing. And I wrote to The Guardian and also to Iain Stewart about that.
So you're no slouch then. You haven't just written to Iain, you've written to the press as well. And that's very important, actually. But what was his response?
He did respond. I chased him up because I was looking for a response before commitment to the 31st of December deadline. He did pass on a response from the Department for Exiting the European Union in the last few days of January, just before the department terminated itself and closed the lights, turned the lights off so that there was no possibility to respond to them. But they agreed with me that it was complex, wide-ranging, significant consultation would be needed, and said that they were working at pace to resolve this. Now, you can't disagree with that because, snail's pace is still a pace. So they were working at pace. Anyway, they disappeared by then, so it was impossible to write back to them specifically. But we had promises that it was all going to be looked after.
I guess they disappeared at pace as well. Would that be fair to say?
They did, yes, disappear at pace. The letter was sent just before they terminated.
Well, one of their last acts then. One must be grateful for small mercies.
Yeah, before turning the lights off.
Before turning the lights off. Okay. On a more serious, well, Brexit's serious enough, but on a more serious note, one of the things I know that you do, having talked to you a few times, is you work actively for charities in Africa on all sorts of things. But you'd worked previously in sort of around various diseases. I know you're now working on COVID. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the particular experience I drew from, I'd worked in a number of African countries, a number of projects, but resolving the Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone, getting to zero Ebola. And one experience I drew from that, that's brought out in a report that I commissioned, is the importance of community in working to combat the virus. And I was keen to emphasize that in mid-March, writing to Iain Stewart and also to Robert Jenrick to ask for quite specific help with coronavirus community support groups. Later on, I was involved with the one in Milton Keynes. But I was asking generally. Robert Jenrick was the relevant cabinet minister, so I copied him, got an automated response saying, please send it to my portal, which I did. And as I say, asked for very specific help for coronavirus community support groups in general, which were conspicuously absent from the government's guidance. There was no response.
Yeah, and Jenrick could, of course, escape from the paper bag by saying that it's not his responsibility because he's not your MP, but there we go.
It's his remit as he's the relevant cabinet minister.
And we're sitting here in nearly September, knowing full well how right your prediction was. It's a team game because we're seeing local outbreaks because of people not following sensible rules based on science. I'm a scientist, But I noticed that sociology isn't science, and you have therefore to really retrain people to think and act differently. I think that we know that the government's been left wanting on the question of being sort of stuck in fridges while they should have been listening to sciences. I don't know what they're doing right now, but that's a wrap from me.
Well, the irony is that I know full well that UK money used to combat emergencies is used very rigorously in every country in the world, because I've been answerable in, the DFID office in Freetown in Sierra Leone, for example, used very rigorously in every country in the world except one, which is the UK, where ministers make up their own political targets and mark their own homework. And the two people who are the Conservatives who particularly knew about this, one of whom was effectively my boss through DFID at the time, two people are Justine Greening and Rory Stewart, and those two people have been sacked, but we could have done with their help. I should, in fairness to Iain Stewart, to say I did chase him up a couple of months later, and actually from his autoresponder, I saw that he had flagged up which local groups were involved, which is one thing that I had asked for. So it was a bit late to help in that instance, but he had undertaken some response, and he did reply.
I think that is actually a hallmark above many people we've talked to in this series, that the Tory MPs with a big majority simply don't respond at all. So this is by no means a punitive interview. And we're coming on to the sort of the third point here, which is really about, I know you wrote about Dominic Cummings to him and got actually a really rather good response. That was mirrored actually by the one that I had in my area. It's the only response I've had from my MP. Take us through that one.
Well, Iain Stewart appreciated the problem. He said, he understood this because he had elderly parents in Scotland. He would love to have been able to visit them, but unlike Dominic, sorry, he didn't say unlike Dominic Cummings, but it is true to say that unlike Dominic Cummings, he'd respected the protocol and worked within it. So, he appreciated people's frustrations. So, it was good to hear that. I can't then follow why he supported Dominic Cummings, who had not done as he'd done, but at least there was empathy in that letter. And that particular one, I didn't have to chase up for an answer.
I guess that's for another day as to why he acted together with the rest of the herd, and I think we could guess the answer. But in fact, the point of the matter is I have seen that letter because you sent it to me, and it looked rather more like a personal letter, which is, I think, is why people write letters, to get personal replies. I also realise how difficult it is to reply to everyone, which they always say. So a bit of a brownie point there for Iain Stewart, actually, on that one. So, Mike, what would you like Iain Stewart to do next?
Let's have a public meeting. There are plenty of questions that I've put that we haven't had answers to. This concerns public money, hundreds of millions of pounds. It's likely to be wasted. I've seen government IT projects in disaster mode before and have been there to fix them. At a later stage, this particular one for the Northern Ireland Protocol is at the early stage. Other people will probably have significant questions too. Other people with insights who could help if politicians are prepared to listen to them. Let's have a public meeting, question time style format, for example.
Fantastic.
And bring some of these questions out.
Fantastic. You can't say fairer than that. You're offering help as well as a public meeting. Thank you so much, Mike Cashman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.